Welcome to your Farm and Home Show. My name is Joanna Coles, and today we're visiting with Kristin Hildabrand, Warren County Extension Agent for Horticulture. Fall is a good time of year to be doing some of these maintenance type things.
Oh, absolutely. And so maybe if you're going around in your garden or landscape, you may see that maybe the clump of peonies, maybe it just is not doing as well. I know personally for my own garden and around the house, I think that when the house was first built, they were trying to incorporate more tree canopy, and things like that. So whenever it was first put out, it probably had more sunlight, and now it's completely shaded. So it has not done well. So with peonies, that might be some of the things that you might want to look out for the month of September, because September is a good month to go ahead and maybe dig those up and replant them or transplant them into a newer location to kind of help improve the success of the peonies.
Absolutely. Now sometimes, Kristin, I know my grandmother had a big clump of peonies. And if you run into that situation, it might be a good time to divide some of that.
Fall is the absolute best time of all, so that way that if you're looking at your perennials, whatever it happens to be, it's a great time of year to go ahead, like you said, go ahead and redig it if it needs to, replant it, or like you said, take divisions from it. And there's a couple of things to know, especially when you've got peonies, that you need to look at. So the first thing that I like to mention about peonies, especially if it's one that's not performing as well, is that you want to make sure that you get your new site ready to go first. Because anytime when you move one plant into a new location, there's going to be a little bit of transplant shock. So as long as you get the site ready beforehand, then it makes it that much easier to move that from the previous location into the new location. 3 things I always recommend: well-drained soil, because peonies are real bad for having root rot issues. So look for well-drained soils. Also look for good air circulation to help dry off that foliage, because it is like a spring blooming type perennial. And then 2, you want to make sure that you have full sunlight. So 6 hours of sun is good, but really 8 hours of sunlight is best. So go ahead and kind of get that site prepared and ready.
And a lot of people say, well, I have really heavy clay soils and it's just not well drained. Would you recommend maybe choosing a raised bed situation in that?
Yes, I think raised beds are great because this is a perennial type of plant, a flower. And so anytime that you can have it off to the side, especially if you don't have any of those things, like especially the well-drained soil, you can go ahead and build up a raised bed with soil, so that way it does drain well, so that way you don't have the root rot problems. 2, I think it's really good for weed control as well. I know grasses can be a problem. There's some other type of weeds, depending on where you're located at, that can really, take away from the blooms that we really want. So make sure you do get that site prepared in that right location. And then the other thing, when you do get that site ready to go, then you can go ahead and start digging up like a previous plant. So I always recommend that you go ahead and kind of work your way around the plant as easily as possible, but you just want to try to remain as much root system as possible. It is going to go through a little bit of transplant shock, but you just want to try to retain as much of that as possible. So if somebody wanted to use, say, for instance, like a garden fork, or maybe they want to take a shovel and go all the way around in a circle, and then they can kind of pry it a little bit loose, that might be a little bit easier to do. So after you've done that, let's just say, like mine's pretty small, so I probably could go right in, but let's just say, like you said, it's a larger clump. What are you going to do at that point? So that is when you want to look at division. And so anytime you've got a big clump of it, you do want to make sure that you have at least 3 to 5 buds or eyes on that particular peony. And it's really easy to kind of count it once you remove some of the soil. You want to do it kind of lightly. You could probably get a little brush out if you needed to, so that way you can kind of see the eyes a little bit better. But if you do need to take divisions, use a clean and a sharp knife. Make sure it's done ahead of time, so that way you don't promote any disease or other bacteria into that. And then you can go ahead and put it right into that planting hole. Now I will say too, Joanna, we don't want the eyes to be planted too deeply. That's the other thing. We want to make sure it's at least 1 to 2 inches below the soil surface, but we don't really want it any deeper than that, or you're not going to have any blooms.
Yeah, and so you got to be really careful if you mulch over top of it, because you might put it in the soil, but then you
Right.
put the mulch on top of it. That's just more that plant has to go
And
through.
sometimes I have difficulty knowing exactly how deep that 1 to 2 inches is, because once you dig a hole, sometimes it may be a little bit larger than what you meant for it to be. If you want to get like a measuring tool, like, some type of ruler or something, and that way you can kind of see it a little bit better, so that way it doesn't get below that 1 to 2. Yeah.
We appreciate you watching the Farm and Home Show, and we'll see you next time.